You are listening to Texas History Lessons, a slow walk through Texas history made in Texas by a Texan for everyone, everywhere.
We are constantly reminded about our country's history. Every 4th of July, we commemorate the events of 1776 with a national holiday of fireworks, barbecues, and community events. And in 2026, the United States will be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So, get used to hearing the term semi-quincentennial quite a bit in the next couple of years, and prepare yourself for quite a bit of discussion and debate about what it means to be an American and how we should deal with our country's complicated history. We'll be hearing a lot about the Founding Fathers, even more than we already do. But imagine what it was like for people in the first 50, 75, and 100 years. Through history and our collective memory, we create and shape what it means to be a citizen of the United States. We also honor the people, events, and things we admire through literature and art, through statues, and through the names we give to places and even to our own children. It might serve us well as modern students of Texas history to remain aware of the close chronological proximity that the Texas rebels of 1835 and 1836 had with the American rebels of 1776. Many of the people in Texas, like Sam Houston, had parents that fought in the American Revolutionary War. To say that the founding era made a significant impact on the people of the United States living in Mexican Texas in the 1830s is an understatement. The founding era was a living memory that they carried with them to Texas. In 1836, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, George Washington had only been in his grave for 37 years, and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had been dead for almost 10 years, both having died on July the 4th, 1826. And one of the last founding fathers, James Madison, he was still alive while the Texas War for Independence raged on. Reminders of that earlier revolution, along with the ideas and values associated with it, were used as inspirational tools while the outcome of the Texas Revolution was still uncertain. And, as I intend to make clear, these revolutionary founding fathers were represented on the battlefield of San Jacinto in a very explicit reminder. But before I get to what I mean by the founding fathers being at San Jacinto, I want to consider an article published in the Saturday, February 27th, 1836 edition of the Telegraph and Texas Register. Now, keep in mind that the Alamo was under siege at that time, and Texas independence had not yet been declared. That wouldn't happen until March the 2nd. And this article begins with a quote attributed to John Adams. "Live or die, sink or swim, survive or perish, I go for this measure." A similar quote can be found in a work titled Imaginary Speech by John Adams in Daniel Webster's 1826 volume Discourse on the Lives and Services of Adams and Jefferson. It begins with a similar statement: "Sink or swim, live or die, survive or perish, I give my hand and my heart to this vote." It is true, indeed, that in the beginning we aimed not at independence, but there's a divinity which shapes our ends. The injustice of England has driven us to arms, and blinded to her own interest for our good, she has obstinately persisted till independence is now within our grasp. And then, after several lines on the importance of declaring independence, the speech closes with the following: "All that I have, and all that I am, and all that I hope in this life, I am now ready here to stake upon it, and I leave off as I begun, that live or die, survive or perish, I am for the Declaration. It is my living sentiment, and by the blessing of God it shall be my dying sentiment. Independence now, and independence forever." The anonymous author of the 1836 article relied on this being common knowledge and filled it with revolutionary sentiments that could have been lifted from similar documents from the 1770s. In the article, published in 1836, the author wrote, "When, in accordance with that regenerating truth, the people, through their agents, shall declare independence and proceed to the erection of a new government for their future security, how much would it add to the moral sublime of her attitude? And how irresistible would be her arm if the bosom of each of her sons should swell with the resolution that live or die, sink or swim, survive or perish, they go for this measure." This was the fervent language of one of the patriots of the American Revolution of 76. And why should it not be the language of every patriot of the Texas Revolution of 35? Comparing the two revolutions in every point of view, the revolution now going on in Texas is as just and heart-stirring as the revolution which separated America from England. And who does not at this day feel pained when he reflects how many Tories the men of that revolution had to contend against, how much is detracted from the grandeur of that revolution, and how much honor is added to it that men good and true in every respect, except their Tory principles, should be hung like dogs from the limbs of trees, whenever and wherever they could be found, and that too by their countrymen and neighbors. Now that last line is evidence that there were many in Texas that did not support the movement for independence, and it was a very explicit and blatant threat to people that weren't actively supporting the revolution. Another piece of evidence is the little-known occurrence of a gathering of Texas Tories, people that supported Mexico still, who had gathered on this hill to watch Santa Anna defeat Sam Houston. To their dismay, that did not happen, and the hill afterwards bore the name Tory Hill. You'd be hard-pressed to find any reference to it, except in a very few places. An even earlier newspaper shares a December 25th, 1835 letter that James Walker Fannin of Goliad fame or infamy had written to William Ward and members of the Georgia Battalion. Now, this is the same Fannin that Houston called an unfortunate man after the disaster that led to so many getting killed at Goliad. And in this letter, Fannin complimented the, quote, warm-hearted patriot sons of Georgia, saying, quote, "The love of liberty with them is an innate principle, and grows with their growth and strengthens with their strength. Born, raised, and educated in the school of liberal principles and free institutions, and recognizing no other system of political economy save that bequeathed to posterity by Washington, and more recently inculcated by Jefferson, you have promptly and nobly met my own expectations. In marching to their rescue in this western wilderness of promise." And there the quote ends. And then a little bit later in the letter, Fannin returned to the theme of patriotism and the principles of the founding era, with an embrace of chivalric heroism as a bonus. He wrote, "The days of chivalry are past, but not their recollection. Many a bold knight performed wondrous deeds of arms in the cause of the Holy Cross and under the most sacred banner. Many were the lances shivered and rich the blood shed simply to gratify some proud beauty and obtain a crown from her fair hand or some other insignia of favor. The consecration of the Georgia Battalion in the cause of Texas is a striking proof and carries with it infallible evidence of their legitimate descent from the true stock of 1776. The same love of liberty and detestation of tyranny, so boldly exemplified in the sires, is now to be found, and I hope soon to be acted out in the sons. No longer can the question be asked of me, where are your friends? What are they doing for the cause of liberty? Where are your Georgia volunteers? The answer is made by the shrill sound of the fife, the soul-stirring beat of the drum, and the flash of the bright sun on your brighter arms. A lot of imagery there, reminiscent of imagery we still see to this day in artwork depicting the American Revolution. Now, in another article, Frank White Johnson, you might not be familiar with him. Mr. Johnson wrote an article published in the Telegraph and Texas Register on January 16th, 1836. In it, he makes use of not just the memory of the American War of Independence, but he connects it to the memory of the Mexican War of Independence that had begun only 26 years before 1836. And he wrote, Texas herself, free from military rule, yet hears on her borders the insolent tone of the tyrant's myrmidons, yet hears the groans of her oppressed Mexican friends, and their call for assistance. Her volunteer army will answer that call, and with a determination to aid and assist them in reestablishing their Constitution and their liberty, they march to victory or the grave. They invite into their ranks all friends to freedom, of whatever name or nation. They invite them to unite in establishing on a firm and solid foundation on Mexican soil the banners of Morales and Hidalgo, inscribed with their own national mottos, uninfluenced by views of individual interest. They desire that all true friends shall participate in the glory. Their names will be remembered in the bright pages of the historian and in the ballad and song of the liberal Mexicans. And then Johnson continues by saying, to arms, then, Americans, to aid in sustaining the principles of 1776 in this Western Hemisphere. To arms, native Mexicans, in driving tyranny from your homes, intolerance from your altars, and the tyrant from your country. And then even a little bit later on, Johnson added, not only Texas and Mexicans, but the genius of liberty demands that every man do his duty to his country and leave the consequences to God. Now, when this article was written, Johnson, along with a man named Dr. James Grant, were preparing to lead the ill-fated mission to attack Matamoros rather than stay with Fannin, another adherent to the principles of 1776, and strengthen the defense of Texas. Instead, they were going to take the fight to Mexico. And many of the men that followed Johnson and Grant and went away from the part of Texas that they were supposed to be trying to defend, many of them, including Dr. Grant, were killed by General Reyes soldiers. Johnson got lucky and survived. And then when Houston enacted his policy of withdrawing the military to the east, Johnson, rather than embracing and further acting on his revolutionary principles in support of Texian independence, he became disgruntled the way things were going, and he went back and pretty much pouted at home. Now, a letter written from Alabama in November 1835 and sent to Stephen F. Austin also focuses on the shared heritage of the American Revolution that people use so often in justifying or arguing for what they thought should be done. H.J. Harwell, Alfred V. Scott, and James E. Belzer wrote the following: General, your struggle in many respects is so identical in principle and character with our own glorious revolution that it cannot fail to create the deepest emotion in every American bosom, and enlist in your behalf the warmest sympathies and most active solicitude of our extended and happy republic. We cannot forget that you are our brethren, that you were born in our own land of liberty, in the land of Washington, of Jefferson, and of Franklin, that your ancestors periled their lives at Lexington, Bunker Hill, and Germantown. And permit us, General, as descendants of the same common ancestors, on behalf of the meeting, to congratulate you upon the first successes of your revolution at Gonzales, Goliad, and San Antonio. These victories, like our own consecrated Lexington, Bunker Hill, and Concord, are but beacon lights to guide you to higher achievements, and in the end, to a brilliant termination of your dawning revolution. Now, bear in mind that comparison of the battles, and bear in mind the people that were singled out, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, because that's going to come up here in just a minute. And following the Battle of San Jacinto, while efforts were underway to establish the Republic of Texas, gain recognition of independence, and prepare for Mexican efforts to retake the territory, people still sought to link the Texas War of Independence with the American War of Independence. And there was an article that was published later in that year of 1836, and it listed revolutionary battles. Quote, "We believe the following to be a complete list of the principal battles fought during the War of the Revolution, with the exceptions of a few in the southern states." And I'm not going to go through all of them, but it lists Battle of Concord, April 19th, 1775, of Bunker Hill, June 15th, 1775. There's the Old Hampton, Virginia battle, where we took 5 decked vessels sometime in November 1775. Battle of Great Bridge, Battle of Long Island, Battle of Fort Washington, Fort Lee, White Plains. A lot of these, most of you probably are not familiar with, but they were remembered then and shared. And then there's the Battle of Princeton, Brandywine, Germantown, Burgoyne's army taken near Saratoga, Battle of the Red Banks, on up down to the massacre at Groton, Connecticut, September 6th, 1781. Battle of Eutaw Springs, September 9th, 1781, of Kings Mountain, and then Cornwallis and his army taken, October 19th, 1781. Now, one thing they remembered back then that a lot of us don't necessarily remember, we just remember the victories, Washington leading us to victory, the United States to victory, was that there were a lot of battles that didn't go very well for the American rebels. And then in the article, they continued by saying, "The foregoing list has suggested to us the plan of drawing up a summary of the most remarkable military events of Texas during her struggle for independence since the year 1827. Going back and extending this in time, because a lot of times nowadays we focus mostly on 1835, 1836. I've been guilty of that in the last few episodes, but they go back to 1827. And I believe we can go back even farther, but to early 1812 and 1813, but I digress. Let me get back to this. So in this article, they're focusing on the struggle for independence since the year 1827, and quote, "The results produced by the Revolution of 76 will show, we conceive, some analogy when compared with those of Texas in 1836, as the example set by that country has contributed much towards raising the spirit of liberty and the adoption of free institutions among the nations of the American continent and in Mexico. So may the political regeneration of this republic be the means of effecting a most essential vicissitude in the condition of the former empire of Montezuma. It is morally certain that the Anglo-American principles and polity will in the course of time extend across the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific, carrying along with them all the consequent improvements and changes, from the vis inertid to a restless desire of aggrandizement and amelioration of circumstances." This was written in 1836. And then they went on and said, "Summary of the most remarkable military events of Texas during her struggle for independence since the year 1827. In Natchitoches, 1827, the premature attempt was made by Colonel Edwards and a few followers to convert Texas into an independent nation under the name of Fredonia Republic, which, not receiving the support of the citizens in general, was soon put down by the United Mexican and Texican authorities. In Natchitoches, 2nd August 1827, battle of that name between the Mexican General Don Jose de los Piedras, in which the latter was defeated. Object, the removal of the military, by whom the inhabitants considered themselves aggrieved. Number of the Mexicans, 375, of the Texicans, 250. In June 26, 1832, the fort of Velasco, commanded by Colonel Don Domingo Ugartequea, was taken by the Texicans under John Austin. Number of the Mexican garrison, 173, of the besiegers, 132. In June 1835, the Mexican garrison of Anahuac under Captain Tenoria with 30 men surrendered to the Texians under Colonel Travis. October 1st, 1835, rout at Gonzales of a detachment of cavalry from the Mexican garrison at Bayard. October 9th, 1835, surprise and capture of Goliad by Captain Collinsworth with 50 men, the Mexican garrison under Lieutenant Colonel Sandoval. On October 28th, 1835, Battle of Concepcion near Bayard, in which the Mexicans, 450 strong, were defeated with considerable loss by Colonels Bowie and Fannin with 92 men. November 3rd, capture of Lepantitlan on the River Nueces by Adjutant Westover. November 8th, 1835, the grass fight near Bayard, where the Mexicans were compelled to retire under cover of the artillery of the town. Mexicans numbered from 300 to 400, the Texians about 200. December 9th, 1835, termination of the first campaign by the assault of San Antonio de Bayard, when 1,300 Mexicans surrendered to the Texians. 2 days previous, Colonel Ugartequea had introduced into the fort of Alamo 600 men as reinforcements to General Cos, commander of the Mexican forces. Then began the second campaign, January 1836 expedition against Matamoros, which proved a total failure on the part of the Texians in the capture and destruction of the small parties engaged in it, commanded by Johnson Grant, deceased. February 21st, 1836, the town of Bayard was taken by Mexicans when the Texian garrison retired into the Alamo. March 6, 1836, assault and storming of the Alamo by Santa Anna and a numerous army of Mexicans, when the garrison of that fort was put to the sword. March 9th, 1836, first fight of the Mission del Refugio between Captain King and 20 men and superior numbers of the enemy, when the former gained the advantage. March 10th, 1836, retreat of General Samuel Houston from Gonzales at the time of the burning of that town. March 10th, 1836, second fight of the Mission del Refugio, when Colonel Ward attacked and drove back a large force of Mexicans. March 11th, at night, 1836, retreat of Colonel Ward and his detachment from the Refugio, being surrounded by an overwhelming force of the enemy. The article then talks about the final surrender of Ward and his massacre with Colonel Fannin and his division. And then it jumps to March 19th, 1836, the defeat of Colonel Fannin by the Mexicans under General Urrea, their surrender on terms of capitulation, which were perfidiously violated, and Fannin and 415 men were all massacred, excepting 19 who on that occasion made their escape. March 27th, 1836, retreat of General Samuel Houston from the River Colorado. March 31st, 1836, the town of San Felipe de Austin burned by the Texians. April 16th, 1836, Harrisburg burned. New Washington on the 20th by the New Mexicans. April 21st, 1836, the decisive Battle of San Jacinto, when the division of the Mexican army commanded by Santa Anna in person was completely discomfited and himself made prisoner, notwithstanding General Cos had brought to his aid the night previous a reinforcement of 500 men. General Samuel Houston commanded the Texians. April 24th, 1836, retreat of all the Mexican forces beyond the frontier of Texas. And the article continues again with this closing part, and bear with me, it's because it's a connection that they were trying to make then, and a lot of those people did believe, that tied them to the American Revolution. They wrote, "The victory of San Jacinto concludes the second campaign of Texas, and from thence a new epoch in her history may be dated. After that event, the turmoil and ravages of war were succeeded by a disposition to establish a government and by the return of the families to their homes." And catch this part right here. They wrote, "The names of Aaron Burr and Hayden Edwards Jr. deserve a place in the history of our country because they were the original, though unsuccessful, projectors of Texian independence. The capture of Cornwallis and his army in the United States put the seal to the political emancipation of the Republic, and from that of Santa Anna and the Mexicans, we confidently expect the like result." Now, this was written quite a few months after April 21st, the Battle of San Jacinto, and they're expecting it to lead to political emancipation. But that jumps me ahead into my After San Jacinto episode that I've been working on. But it's just another piece of evidence that they didn't necessarily think they had succeeded 100% just because they had defeated Santa Anna and captured him. It gave them a good leg up and a good start, but it was going to be a long time before anything was secure 100% for them. But hopefully I'll be getting to that pretty detailed episode fairly soon. Now, those are just a few examples of comparisons to and trying to make connections to the founding era, the founding fathers. And it's pretty easy to find them, actually. They weren't hard to find. And I plan on adding to these examples, showing how the people of 1830s and 1840s Texas were seeking to create an identity that is firmly founded in the heritage and memory of the American Revolutionary era. It's identity building. It's history making. But what about the founding fathers at San Jacinto that I've alluded to in the title of this episode? I mean, almost all of them, except for James Madison, were dead. The principles and ideals, yes, they were being carried with them, but they were represented, the founding fathers were represented in a different way. Now, Houston had, in his official report, he claimed to have had 783 men in the conflict of April 21st, 1836. A more detailed accounting that I came across lifted that number up to 845 being in the Texian army at San Jacinto. Further investigations by people revealed that one Captain Wiley's company was left off of both of those lists. And when you add him and others into it, that leads to the conclusion that there could have been around as many as 910 officers and soldiers at San Jacinto. And then further investigations by historical sleuths like Lewis Wilkes Kemp have added more names to the list of veterans, or at least people claiming to have been at San Jacinto. And the website for the San Jacinto Battleground Museum says that the number equals 935 men. And if you look closely at the notes, it acknowledges that some of them can't really be proven. They were given a land grant based on the fact that they said they were at San Jacinto. So that does not necessarily mean that every one of the 935 participated in that battle. Some evidence suggests that due to injury, illness, or other assignments, even on the field of San Jacinto, I suspect that the number that Houston led on the battlefield was somewhere between 783 and 935. And when you add in the number of soldiers left behind at Harrisburg, the number of Texian soldiers that Houston might have had in his service had they not been ill, had they been worth anything at all, or if they hadn't been assigned to guard the baggage and the ill and the ones that weren't really worth having in the army, or the ones that were on other assignments. That lists the number of people that could have been there possibly up to 1,192. But for the sake of what I'm doing here, we're going to look at that 700 to 900 people that were at San Jacinto and show how the founding fathers were there. Because there were 19 George Washingtons at San Jacinto and Harrisburg. 16 of them fought at San Jacinto, and this information is based off of the veteran bios provided by the San Jacinto Museum and Battlefield website. There was George Washington Browning, who was born in, of all places, Scotland in 1806. He fought with Captain Amasa Turner's company. George Washington Davis, born about 1810 in Tennessee, served as a private in Captain Mosley Baker's company. There's George Washington Gardner. He also served as a private in Captain Mosley Baker's company. Then there was George Washington Hockley, born in Philadelphia in 1802. And he served as Sam Houston's chief of staff and commanded the Texian cannons, the Twin Sisters, on April 21st. He accompanied Santa Anna and Almonte when they finally made their trip to Washington, D.C. to meet with Andrew Jackson. And he later served as Secretary of War for the Republic of Texas and has a county named in his honor. He's probably the most well-known of all the George Washingtons of San Jacinto. There's George Washington Jones, who was born in Tennessee in 1809, who fought with Captain William Kimbrough's company. George Washington Lang, born in Tennessee in 1795. He was a member of Captain Henry Teal's company. Henry Teal was actually not there. Somebody else took over command of his company. Teal was at Harrisburg. I'll be sharing a story about him in the future. And Lang also fought in the Mexican-American War. George Washington Poe, and I would love to be able to find proof that George Washington Poe was somehow related to Edgar Allan Poe, but I haven't found that. He was born in Ohio about 1800. He was present at the Siege of Bayard and San Jacinto with artillery in the fight of April 20th, and he left that night after that skirmish because of concerns about his wife, who apparently had shown up near the battlefield in distress, and he was granted leave. But he was at San Jacinto and he participated in the actions on the 20th. George Washington Robinson, born in Missouri in 1814, was among the wounded Texians, and the list goes on and on. George Washington Lawrence, George Washington League, George Washington Lowness, George Washington Pentecost, George Washington Petty, George Washington Smith, George Washington Wright. In addition to all the George Washingtons, there were another 3 with Washington as either their first name or middle name: Washington Perry Reese, Washington H. Seacrest, and James Washington Winters. Seacrest was a member of a group that I'm extremely interested in. He rode with Captain Henry Wax Carnes Spy Company. You might have heard of Carnes County, but you really do need to know about Henry Wax Carnes, who was associated with Deaf Smith and the spy companies, the scout companies, the ranger companies that were always on the move and played such a crucial role in gathering information and taking action in the Texas Revolution. And Reese, Washington Perry Reese, he was born in Tennessee in 1815. He would be killed by Comanches in 1839. And then there's James Washington Winters, who, of all the reminiscences and memoirs of people that fought in the battle, he's provided one of the ones that I consider my favorite, one of the favorites to read and go over. There are several, but his is really good. He was very young at the time. He's from Tennessee, born in 1817, and he helped dig the graves for the few Texan dead from the battle of the April 21st. And in addition to all the Washingtons and the George Washingtons, there are at least another 20 Georges that fought at San Jacinto that may or may not have been named for Washington. No one needs to get that crazy and try to figure that out. I'm just throwing it out there. And then there were 4 Thomas Jeffersons at the Battle of San Jacinto. Thomas Jefferson Adams of Mississippi, that had arrived in Texas in 1834 when he was about 22 years old. Thomas Jefferson Callahan, born in 1817 in Illinois. He had joined with Captain Amasa Turner's company in New Orleans and came to Texas. Thomas Jefferson Robinson, born in Alabama in 1813, fought with Captain Isaac N. Moreland's company. And finally, there is the big Thomas Jefferson of the group, Thomas Jefferson Rusk. Born in South Carolina in 1803, he signed the Texas Declaration of Independence. Then he served as Secretary of War for the interim government under President Burnett, before leaving that position and joining Houston's staff as a colonel and fighting in the field at San Jacinto. He then later became Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court in 1838. He was active in helping establish Natchitoches University in 1845. Sadly, it no longer exists, but it was an early effort at higher education in Texas, and he was involved in setting that up. Served as president of the Convention of 1845 that agreed to the terms of annexation to the United States. And after annexation, he joined Houston in being the first of 2 Texas senators in the United States Senate. And that's just the highlights of his career. I'm sure there's a lot more good and a lot more bad we can probably dig up, and we will in the future. In addition to the Thomas Jeffersons, there was also Jefferson A. Barton, a South Carolinian who fought with Captain Jesse Billingsley's company at San Jacinto. So we've got the George Washingtons, we've got the Thomas Jeffersons. Who was the other person mentioned in that article earlier? Yeah, it was Benjamin Franklin. There were 8 Benjamin Franklins at San Jacinto. Benjamin Franklin Mims fought in Captain Robert J. Calder's company, and he had come to Texas to Austin's colony in 1824 when he was only about 9 years old. His family was one of the old 300 of Austin's colony. Then there was Benjamin Franklin Bryant, a Georgian born in 1800. Bryant served as a captain with the 2nd Regiment of Texas Volunteers and continued the habit of naming children after their heroes when Sam Houston Bryant was born. Then we have Benjamin C. Franklin, a Georgian born in 1805. And he, after the battle, was sent by Thomas Jefferson Rusk to Galveston Island to notify President Burnet of the victory. It's an interesting story. It's in the next few episodes I'm going to be doing. Basically, in a nutshell, he was accompanied by his captain, Robert C. Calder, on the mission. And yeah, Calder and Franklin were dedicated to trying to get there as fast as possible and give the information. Calder was just as interested in going so that he could see the young woman that he would later marry. Her family had escaped to Galveston and tried to escape ahead of the Mexican army as it approached. And Franklin, Benjamin C. Franklin, became the first man to hold a judicial position in the Republic of Texas. Benjamin Franklin Hardin, born in Georgia in 1803, he fought as a first lieutenant under Captain William M. Logan. Now, from what I understand, his brother, Augustine Blackburn Hardin, was a signer of the Texas Declaration of Independence. And as you hear, they came to Texas really as fast as they can. Both of them came to Texas. Benjamin Franklin and Augustine Hardin came to Texas after killing 2 men in Tennessee. And some say that they are related to the notorious killer that would be born later, John Wesley Hardin. But I have not been able to connect the dots genealogically wise to prove that and back that up. But from the little I read about the violence that their family was capable of and had been involved with, wouldn't surprise me. But if you have any information, you can show me the hard evidence connecting the dots between the family members to how exactly they are related. Blake, in his book, The Pestillier, the novel about John Wesley Hardin, makes that claim and says that Hardin's father was related to the signer of the Declaration of Independence, but he doesn't go into specifics about how they're related, uncles, cousins, whatever. It's probably is likely, but I digress. Then we've got James Madison at San Jacinto. James Madison Bell, he fought at San Jacinto, and he was killed in a fight with Lipan Apaches in 1848. They actually was trailing a bunch of Lipan Apaches that had come in and killed another signer, the name escapes me at the moment, of the Declaration of Independence in a raid. Then there's James Monroe. James Monroe was the 5th president and one of the final founding fathers to serve as president. And he was represented at San Jacinto by James Monroe Hill. And then we get to the Marquis de Lafayette, the French hero of the American Revolution. He was president at San Jacinto in the name of Isaac Lafayette Hill. And then there's also another representative of famous Frenchmen, Napoleon Bonaparte Hill. And you can't forget the poet Mirabeau Bonaparte Lamar, who was named in honor of both Napoleon and another French hero, Honore Gabriel Riquetti, the Comte de Mirabeau. And then there were 2 Christopher Columbuses at San Jacinto. Christopher Columbus Bruff, who fought with Captain Amasa Turner, and Christopher Columbus Edinburgh, who was, of all places, born in France, according to the records, in 1799. And before we go, let's not forget Sam Houston's mentor, Andrew Jackson, who had led him at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. He was the hero of New Orleans and was president of the United States in 1836. There were 4 Andrew Jacksons at San Jacinto. There was Andrew Jackson Beard, Andrew Jackson Berry, Andrew Jackson Harris, and Andrew Jackson McGowan. And Andrew Jackson McGowan named one of his sons Samuel Houston McGowan. Of course he did. That just helps show the trend and the connections I was trying to make and the importance of how we give name to things we want to honor. And a lot of that was done back then in the names you chose for your children. That's going to do it.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does, without me lifting a finger. So I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists, like Kunle, put people at the heart of everything they create.
In the average household, there are dozens of connected devices. Here in the Comcast family, we're building an integrated in-home Wi-Fi solution for millions of families like my own. It brings people together in meaningful ways.
Kunle and his team are building a Wi-Fi experience that connects 1 billion devices every year. Learn more about how Comcast is redefining the future of connectivity at comcastcorporation.com/Wi-Fi.
Thanks for listening to Texas History Lessons. We'll be back as soon as possible. I have, like I said earlier, a lengthy investigation into what happened after the Battle of San Jacinto, what happened after April 21st. And there's a lot more to it than just that won the war and the Mexicans fled Texas. That's not what happened at all. And the real story, the real history is much more interesting, and it will lead us down some interesting paths. And so, yeah, there we go. Thanks for listening. Share the show if you've enjoyed it. The theme music is provided by the great Derek McClendon. Please check his music out and go see him if you get a chance in person. And, yeah, we'll be back soon. So thank you. Take care of yourself. Take care of one another. Be kind. Adios.
Oh, sheet.
Honey, chill. It's just laundry.
Not that. I'm talking about these Arm & Hammer Power Sheets. All the power of Arm & Hammer laundry detergent in a convenient tossable sheet.
Oh? sheet.
That's what I'm saying.
And Arm & Hammer Power Sheets deliver an effective clean at a great price. Think of all the laundry we'll do.
And all the money we'll save. Oh, sheet.
Arm & Hammer, more power to you.